Good morning, everyone. This is going to be let's try this thing. Good morning. It's Sunday morning. How are you doing? I've got my coffee, and I just had some thoughts that I wanted to share about censorship. Yes, that lovely word, censorship. So, um, so what brought this on? Well, because it's been in the news a lot lately. First, we have Elon Musk taking over Twitter and that whole debacle, and a conversation about what it costs to be a valid person in the world, the issues of how information gets shared and who controls it, who wants to hide it, who wants to manipulate it. And then I've been watching Graham Hancock new series on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse. And I don't know if you know who Graham Hancock is. I've been watching him and following him for a few years now. And he's he's a journalist. He's an investigative journalist, but his focus is on ancient civilizations and history. So that's where his focus is. And he primarily he's been labeled as a crackpot, pseudo historian, pseudo archaeologist, and yet he has employs a lot of critical thinking in his work. He has gone all over the world to uncover some mysteries that have been plaguing humanity for quite some time. A lot of inconsistencies in the way we understand our history, where humanity came from, etc. And I live not too far from a place called Serpent Mound, and I just found out that he was actually banned from shooting there. And I knew that he had come to give a talk about Serpent Mound, and I'll get into a little bit more about this. And I was really sad that I didn't get a chance to actually hear him speak when he came. And I don't live too far away from it. I live within 100 miles of for Serpent Mound. And if you don't know what Serpent Mound is, you can easily look it up. It is on the track, I guess, for being a World Heritage Site. It is a large snake effigy that is in Ohio, and it has a lot of significance. There's one of the largest effigies, I think, in the United States, but it's also being considered for a World Heritage Site because it's such a unique effigy. And there's a whole history, and I'm not going to go totally into the history of Serpent Mound. But my concern is that, and I've seen this play out over and over and over again, and I've seen this play out, and I'm not going to bring up the C word, in how we talk about knowledge and information and science. And history is, in a lot of ways, science. It may not seem that way to you, but it is. You know, we uncover information about our past, and we make assumptions about the way the past was. And then as technology and as we find more evidence and more information and more data, that we understand the past a little bit better. We should know by now that the history is always written by the victors. So the way history is shaped and presented to humanity is often very controlled. And you have to wonder why. Why would people want to control a certain narrative about something, about our past, about the way things were? There's a lot of political, ideological, controlling reasons as to why people want to do that. And it's very disturbing. And that's why I'm talking about this today, because like I said, so I was born in 68, and I was presented a very traditional mainstream view of history. I was raised Christian. I was raised as an Episcopalian. So I had a certain very typical mainstream upbringing about the way the world is, the way the world works, etc. And what I've noticed is that unless you're really on top of it, and maybe if you have subscription to National Geographic or the Smithsonian, even though now they're a lot more questionable, but that you're really, if you're not really paying attention to new discoveries, that you're going to continue to have the same information you had when you grew up. And we should know that the world is not a static place. The world is dynamic. The world is ever changing. Our understanding about things. And there's a lot of power players. There's a lot of people out there that, like I said, history is written by the victors. And that's not a good thing. Okay. That's not something good, because we can see, like in the United States, how history and the way we perceive the world around us was shaped by the people who controlled the textbook industry or controlled the schools or controlled this. And minorities and other people and certain information is just hived off. Like, it's just buried. It's like, oh, that doesn't fit our narrative. We need to present this narrative right here in our little box, and that is the narrative that is acceptable, etc. Christianity has a large history of that as well. If you look at how the Bible was actually put together, the Council of Nicaea, and I'm being very, very generalized about this. There's a lot more detail. It's really actually quite fascinating about why the Bible is the way it is. And that's why it's so bad to, like, for anybody to take the Bible literally, because it's not a literal text. It is a text filled with allegory, symbolism. There is some history in it, but it's a lot of times it's coded. A lot of times it's mixed in with a lot of other stuff. So you can't take the Bible as literal history, because it is not. Okay. That doesn't mean there isn't seeds of knowledge in there that is valuable, that there's not really, really interesting stuff, because there is. But the Bible is cobbled together. There's a lot of inconsistencies, especially in the New Testaments, that were all cobbled together to create a specific narrative. And again, I'm not going to go completely into that whole history. There's some really good, I'll have to dig out some really good researchers. And again, Graham Hancock, he's not specifically a biblical scholar, but he talks, one thing that he does discuss a lot in his work, that there was a cataclysmic event, often known in scientific, historical, geological circles as what is called the Younger Dryas. And I'm not a geologist. I haven't really studied that, but you always hear about the ages of, like, you've got the blanking. It's Sunday. I haven't had coffee. I need more coffee. When it was very, very cold, I should say, Ice Age. Thank you. And we humans usually understand our history in this is the way it is, right? And ironically, you've got this battle, which I don't know why it's a battle, but because of where I live and because of who my parental units were, I got somewhat involved in the battle over the Creation Museum in near Union, Kentucky, because they wanted to set up shop right down the road from where my parental units lived. And the Creation Museum is created by a guy named Ken Ham, and Answers in Genesis. And they propose or state that the earth and the universe, whatever, is only 6 to 10,000 years old. And they mean that literally. Now I've been in the I have been in the Creation Museum, and it's a crazy place. I have not yet been into the Noah's Ark, the Ark encounter. I have not done that. I haven't splurged on that, but I have been through the Creation Museum, and it is absolute insanity. It really is. I mean, this guy, an AIG, really put forth that the earth and humanity are literally, that everything in the Bible is literally true. You know, that there was a snake, that there was, Adam and Eve and all this other kind of stuff, and that it was literally true. And that it was only 6 to 10,000 years. Some people, lean towards 6,000 years, 10,000 years, but it's crazy. I mean, it's stupid, right? I mean, to take something like that and make that literally true is just silly. Leaning into that again about the Noah's Ark story, a lot of people ridicule that, and for for valid reasons, but you know, as you understand, I mean, because they would say, well, look, the whole world had all these different flood myths. That is true. And this is kind of where I'm getting into the whole Graham Hancock issue, right? Because Graham Hancock talks about this cataclysmic series of events that I think probably happened over 1,000 years, but it did happen relatively like overnight. Like you went from, I think, the Ice Age to these cataclysmic events with upheavals and massive flooding and everything. And it affected the entire planet at some stage or another. And it was such a cataclysmic event that there were these figures that, if you look at origin myths of a lot of these cultures, right, they have these origin myths where someone comes to them, and it can be a variety of people. I won't get into all of them. They come to them to teach them how to farm, how to create art, how to do this, how to build stuff, right? And you look at varying cultures all over the world. It is not just in Egypt, it's not just in Turkey, it's not just in Mexico. It's all over the world, Indonesia, everything. And it's very actually fascinating. And that's not something like, when you are a person like myself, you're raised with these Christian mythos. It's very ingrained in your culture. Even if you don't take it literally, it's still very ingrained. And that shapes the way you look at the world. And so when you reject it, you may reject the entire thing, saying, well, that's all that's completely ridiculous. And it's always some middle ground where it's like, wait a minute, there's some truth into this, and this is ridiculous, but let's try and find what really happened. Because I think that you look at the way the world is and how we have been shaped. It shapes our political views, our religious views, our spiritual and cultural views, the whole 9 yards. And so that does affect us and how we interact with the world around us. So it is really critically important that we do understand where we came from as accurately as we possibly can. And some people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I would argue, I think it does matter. I think it is really important to have the truth about that. And Graham Hancock is one of those researchers who has been actively trying to uncover this, because he saw discrepancies in the historical record, in the things that archaeologists and historians were telling about the way the world was. And he's like, this makes no sense. And you're glossing over this area, and it doesn't make any sense. There's this hypocrisy over here. And why are these patterns all over the world? And so he's putting two and two together. Well, that doesn't make people very happy in established archaeological and historical fields. They don't like that. And needless to say, he's been, over the years, he's getting a lot more legitimacy, though. So, like I said, I grew up with a certain worldview and about the way the world is. Well, ironically, a lot of things have changed since I was in school. One of them, notably, was the discovery of a site called Göbekli Tepe, and that happened in 1994. And that's a really fascinating site. And it's found to be far, far older than any other site that they have come across like that. And that was at a time, and we're talking like 12,000 years ago. And this is like when when they called the Younger Dryas happened. And they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. This is far older than what we're told, the world is, that there was just hunters and gatherers and primitive people running around the world. And how could they have just built this thing? And what was the meaning of it? And there was nothing like this. And then, the other piece of information that's been very mystifying is we're told, oh, okay, well, we've had this hunter-gatherer society. And then seemingly overnight, we've got this civilization. We have farming. We've got, art. We've got all this stuff, right? That happened seemingly overnight. And that's always very much glossed over by a lot of historians and geologists. Things, well, okay, well, overnight, like this is where civilization began, right? And you're like, well, how did that happen? Like, and so it's speculated by Graham Hancock, and he provides, I think, very credible, valid evidence, things that need to be questioned and looked into. And I'm getting to my point here about censorship, that there's more to the story, that there is evidence that there was a cataclysmic event, there's been human civilizations on this planet far older and far longer than we have originally been told. And that all got interrupted at varying times due to these cataclysmic events that were basically extinction level events, but that enough humans survived from these previous civilizations that they were able to basically reseed knowledge into the world again. So that's why it seems to be that seemingly overnight, in cultural terms, that that humanity started farming again and doing civilization and all of that kind of stuff. And the other interesting thing is that the issue of sea level, which we talk about now with climate change, that a lot of, and they talk about how climate change is going to start, and it's already starting to happen, raise the sea levels, and it's going to be encroaching even more on land. Well, this happened, obviously, when you had the Ice Age. You had a lot more open, dry land mass. And then when the ice caps melted and all this water started to rise, a lot of land got eaten up. So there's places in the world, if you actually look at them, they're islands, but then they have these fantastical temples and these structures on them. And they're like, why are they out here in the middle of this island? Well, if you look 12,000 years ago, when this ice age, and when, these are areas like more to the equator, so they were a lot more warm, but there was also a lot more land uncovered. It was not covered up by the sea. So when the sea levels rose, that water ended up covering over a lot of land. And it's something to look more at. And while I'm imagining that there is a level of underwater archaeology that does go on, a lot of it is dismissed. Like, people are not asking the questions. They don't want to have because there's stuff that is buried by the water that we may never see. One of the places that Graham Hancock talks about in his series is Bimini. And I've never seen Bimini, but it's off of the coast of Florida, in the Bahamas. And there are a series of islands, but there's something called the Bimini Road. And it's always kind of that's something, when you bring that up, it's like, it's a conspiracy theory, which is getting to my point. That there's this series of, and they're only like 14 meters or something underneath the waterline off the coast of the Bimini Islands. And it's what looks to be like a road or a runway. And it's a series of what Graham Hancock and other researchers that have chosen to investigate a series of deliberately placed megalithic blocks that build this structure that looks like a road. And it's a very deliberate shape. You can see it from the sky when they do drone footage. And they're like, why was this here? What was this? Okay. They ask questions. But as he says in his series, is that there's not enough people asking questions. They just don't take it seriously. And he questions that. He's like, they should be taking this stuff seriously. Like, why are these things here? And people just dismiss them as that just, oh, it's just a natural formation, or this is just, fake, or this is just, some primitive thing. But they don't actually investigate it and really seriously ask questions like, what is under the water that may give us clues about what really happened on the planet before all this stuff happened. So, he's gone all over the world and he presents his evidence, which I think is very valid. I have read one of his books, which is a really great book. And he talks a lot about that there were some impacts, that some meteoric or asteroid, meteor maybe, impacts that may have contributed, like that maybe we headed in the planet in this cycle, because a lot of times these meteor showers end up being in very wide arctic pattern, like over tens of thousands of years. And that this one point that the planet, this planet got hit by extinction level meteor events. And we hear about this issue in the news that, oh, well, we've got to because I think people do realize we could have another event like that. And he is speculating, he is proposing that this is what probably happened. And that a lot of these structures that are around the thing point to, have a lot of astrological placement. And they're like, why did they focus so much on this? I mean, was it merely to mark the cycles of the sun and everything like that? And why were they, they're like star charts, right? They had stuff, and a lot of these had alignments to specific stars and everything like that. And he proposes that a lot of this probably has to do because they were trying to track it and trying to remind future generations to look to the stars, to make sure that you're paying attention and that we should be more connected to what is going around us in astrological terms. So that's basically what he is doing. He's asking questions, as any good scientist should do, including history, because history is, like I said, a form of a science. You ask questions, you find new evidence, you say, hey, what was this tool for? And you investigate, you research, you use scientific tools to uncover information about that, okay? And he was stating, and I've known this, that a lot of archaeologists and a lot of people in these higher institutions of learning tend to be very resistant to asking questions or allowing certain paradigms to change, because their entire careers are built upon the pedestal of the narrative that the mainstream narrative that they have been a part of and that they have framed their research, right? So if anyone comes along and questions that could completely unravel all the work that they did. Like everything that we know about the way where we came from, what we did, that it will contradict this worldview. And this happened with C. I'm not going to mention the name, but we all know what we're talking about, and how we understand where that came from. We weren't allowed to talk about it. I personally was labeled as a racist. I was labeled as a conspiracy theory, and I was labeled as being uninformed, merely because I was discussing about where I believed that this thing that we've been dealing with for the last several years originated. Um, and I think that that was very political. But the point I'm making is that, and this comes into with what Twitter is doing and Facebook and everything, is that if you ever brought up any of this information, just merely to have a discussion with your friends or family, you were either banned, you were deprioritized, demonetized, everything. You're just not allowed to speak about it. And that's very disturbing. That really, really is disturbing. And I have no opinion about Elon Musk. I don't care about the man one way or the other. But I will say that one thing that he has stated that it was his intention. Now, granted, actions are not intentions. He said something, he may be doing another. That's fair. But he did say that the social media is very fractured, we're very divided, and we need to find a way to be able to come together and to be able to have mature, healthy conversations and discussions about really important issues. With that, I agree. And I think that we are oftentimes prevented from doing so because the powers that be don't want these conversations. And my personal experience with it has been absolutely devastating. I've lost friends from it, and people have considered me a quack, and they should know better. And it really, I take it very personally because I do really try to be very thoughtful about stuff. And it's very sad that I see people and they make assumptions about what I believe or what I am doing, um, and they don't understand it. Like they just make an assumption about it. So going back to the Graham Hancock series, which I do recommend everybody watch. I think it is really interesting and very informative. If you've never thought about this stuff, I highly recommend keeping an open mind and looking at it. Okay. I think he provides very good, interesting evidence and questions, which is a sign of a good scientist, right? We all want to say we believe in science and the scientific method and questioning and critical thinking and everything like that. Well, at what point are you ceasing to be that and using science as a religion, saying, nope, this is all we know about the world. This is all we know about the history of the world. You cannot question this because this is what we know. That's not science, people. That's a religion. Period. Okay. That's why, Ken Ham and his ilk, they peddle religion. They're not peddling science. They're peddling religion. And they're trying to shove it in the framework and they're calling it science. They're calling, oh, this is science, da 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 da. And it's not. It's religion. Science is about questioning. You question. If you have a theory about the way the world was and new information comes up or new data comes up, you have to be open to changing your mind and coming up with new understanding about the way the world is. That is science. And the only way that we can do that, is by allowing information to flow freely. And people get freaked out by that because, like, but these crazy people over here, forget about them. You know how you counter that? By not not throttling knowledge, not throttling data or information. You teach people how to be critical thinkers. You don't censor, you don't ban, you don't silence, you don't put your hands over your ears and ignore things that don't fit into your worldview paradigm narrative. Okay? That is not science. So this is like the 4th or 5th episode of this series, and he is in Ohio. And I was like, I've been to Serpent Mound several times, and it's very interesting, and I do highly recommend you go. I've known historically that there has been controversy. There's been some battle. It's kind of I think it's owned by a nonprofit. It's managed by a nonprofit now. But there's been some battles between who's going to control the narrative of this site. Okay. I've witnessed this over the years. I didn't really think it was this bad though. So he wanted to film for his series, and they basically wrote him an email saying, I'm sorry, you can't film here because you present an idea and a narrative that is not what we know to be true. That's what they had told him. This is the Ohio History Connection, I believe, because they currently own the site and they manage the site. And so they basically wouldn't let him film. And he managed to get around it thanks to drone technology. But the reason why they flat out said, well, I'm sorry, you're proposing alternative theories and information about this site, and we believe, or they said, we know this stuff to be true, and you are going outside of this narrative that we have established as the only facts, right? And we don't want your information polluting our precious worldview, right? And it just made me infuriated because I've seen this play out over the years and I'm angry about it. I'm really angry about it. And if there's one thing that I do not like, censorship. It's a sign that you're afraid. It's a sign that you are weak because don't you you believe that if anybody comes along and has alternative views, that you may lose control over whatever narrative you feel you need to hold on to. And it's like, you got to ask yourself why. Okay? Knowledge, science, history, that information must be allowed to flow. And yes, you're right, there's some crackpot stuff. But if you're actually working with science and you're actually asking questions and you're knowing how to understand the world around us, then I believe that the truth will flow. I don't want to have one group of people over here telling anybody this is the way it is. We have seen what happens in around the world when people try and destroy history. They try, like, you look at the Taliban, look at what they did. They were trying to destroy any evidence of Buddhism in Afghanistan. They blew up a historical, big, huge Buddhist statue in Afghanistan. People want to erase history. They burn books. They destroy artifacts. They steal. They bury. They, everything, because they want to hide it away because it goes against the worldview and the narrative that keeps them in power. And that is how religion works. That you have to believe this literally, and if you go across, you're going to go to hell. You're going to be shunned. You're going to be censored. You're going to have your career ruined. On and on and on and on. And it's very disturbing. And I'm very worried about the state of humanity right now. I really am. It concerns me because I think we're going backwards, not forwards. So it's a half hour. That's primarily what I wanted to say. The show is Ancient Apocalypse. It's on Netflix. I was about ready to say Graham Chapman. That's good too. But it's Graham Hancock, Ancient Apocalypse. It's on Netflix. Please check it out. Read his books. I think that he is very thoughtful. He is not some weirdo crackpot person. He presents his ideas with a lot of evidence. He talks to experts, etc. So keep an open mind, dare to learn something new, and trust that the truth will win out in the end. And maybe it will change your mind. Maybe you'll learn something new, but you cannot be afraid, because our human freedom is so important, and that requires humanity to be able to think and to believe in our, and have a free conscience, you know. And anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Have a good Sunday, and I will see you later. Thanks.